professional, di ba? Doctor po kayo. Ano po yung medical explanation ng suffocation?
Okay, so sabi nila, di ba, na marami namatay dahil dun sa suffocation, no? Tinatawag natin. Suffocation kasi is known as asphyxiation. And pag sinabi naririnig ninyo, paminsan naririnig asphyxiation, ano yun?
Hindi makahinga.
Suffocation. Oo, hindi makahinga, no? Pero yung suffocation is actually, pag sinabi nating, you put it in the context na dahil sa sunog, no, marami namatay, it's mainly due to tinatawag naming inhalational injuries. No?
Okay.
It is one of the factors that can lead to death. No? So, kasama dito sa inhalational injuries, ang more common actually, rather than suffocation, kapag may sunog, is what we call thermal injuries dun sa upper airway. No?
Okay.
Sa madaling salita, nasusunog yung upper airway.
Nasusunog yun. So ano exactly yung nararamdaman ng isang tao kapag nasusuffocate ka? And how long does it take for a person to die of suffocation?
Okay, so ganito, ano, ang sinasabi natin kasing suffocation or asphyxiation is the lack of oxygen, no? As we all know, our body needs oxygen constantly,
Yes.
no? So ang golden period na walang damage into our body, na walang oxygen is within the first 5 minutes.
5
No?
minutes.
Walang
Okay.
brain damage. No?
Walang
Sinasabi
brain
natin.
damage, yeah.
That's why it's essential, 'di ba, pag nagkakaroon ng cardiac arrest, yung mga tao bibigyan ng CPR.
Nare-revive. Oo.
And then part of this is just not just pumping the heart, it's delivering oxygen and opening the airway.
Yes,
no?
exactly.
This is to prevent yun nga, damage into our brain mainly due to lack of oxygenation. No? So, ano nangyayari pag nagkakaroon ng suffocation or asphyxiation, tinatawag natin? So, because of the lack of oxygen. So, pagka nawala yung oxygen into our body, no, lahat ng systems in our body mawawala ng energy. No? Including our brain, which is essential, yung pinaka-importante.
Yes.
No? Including lahat, and then subsequently, lahat ng mga organs natin in our body will lack oxygen, will lack energy, and we will cease to function. No?
You will faint, unconscious.
Yes,
Lalabas.
number one. Number one, ang mangyayari pag wala ng oxygen, you will faint, you will become unconscious, no? You will cease to function, no? And then, kung tuloy-tuloy na nangyari nito, all your body systems will fail also, lahat, no? So, hanggang sa imposible ka naman revive, no? Because of the lack of energy, lack of oxygen, no?
So yun yung mga nangyari doon sa resource.
Yes. Nakakawa.
Ngayon, I don't know. No? This
Yes.
is what the people from the fire department say.
Yes.
Now, kung may smoke, no,
Okay.
sabi nila, to crawl.
Yes.
That buys you more time and you're able to breathe a little longer
Yes.
than walking straight or running straight because the smoke's on top.
Okay, yes, because the smoke is on top, the hot air stays on top. Diba?
Okay.
So, nandun yung smoke.
Yes.
So, yung ilalim is clearer, so you can visualize better, no? Kaya di ba napapansin nyo yung mga walls natin, may borders sa ilalim?
Yes, yes.
Oh, yan yung function kasi niyan, para alam mo nasaan yung walls,
yes.
no? So, nandun ka sa ilalim, you will crawl. And there's more oxygen sa ilalim.
more oxygen.
So, ano nang mangyayari? So, malalaman natin. So, what if this happens to you?
Yes.
No?
Anong
Sa iyo.
gagawin mo?
Sinabi nga ni Kong, you have to duck,
Crawl down.
you crawl down, no? And then, try to cover your mouth
Yun.
with a piece of cloth na
Sabi
sana
nila, Doc,
basa.
wet yun.
Yes,
Sabi
no?
nga eh.
Because it functions as a filter, no? Because part of the inhalational injuries, it's not just thermal injury, not just asphyxiation, it's the increase in carbon dioxide. Minsan, ang naging product ng sunog, cyanide poisoning also, no? So
Kaya
that is to
basa yung
prevent, so
basa
lahat
yung
ng
cloth na
causes
patakip
of
dito.
inhalational injury.
What happens if we cut oxygen from the brain? The condition where the brain is unable to receive an essential amount of oxygen is known as brain hypoxia. However, when the oxygen supply to the brain is completely cut off, then it is known as brain anoxia. The brain needs a constant supply of oxygen to work effectively, so if there's a lack of oxygen, then it results in a medical emergency. There are many cases which can result in complete lack of oxygen supply to the brain, such as suffocation, stroke, cardiac arrest, choking, carbon monoxide poisoning, brain injuries like concussion, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, overdosage of drugs, pneumonia, respiratory arrest, strangulation, extremely low blood pressure, example hypotension, or fainting. Mild symptoms include improper motor functions, memory loss, a lack of focus and attention, poor judgment, while in severe cases it can lead to seizures, coma, or brain death. Brain cells start dying off after 5 to 6 minutes if there is a complete lack of oxygen. If the brain is completely dead, then the brain stops its activity. The pupils inside the eyes avoid responding to light or sound, and the person is unable to breathe without life-saving machines. Even if the brain is dead, the heart keeps on pumping blood to the entire body. Complete lack of oxygen supply can be experienced by any of us, but it is more commonly seen in people who play specific sports like scuba diving, boxing, mountain climbing, swimming, or football. These sports enthusiasts are engaged in activities where they are at a high risk of suffering from a head injury or injury to the windpipe. People suffering from certain medical disorders are also at a high risk of suffering from a lack of oxygen supply to the brain, such as ALS, hypotension, heart disorders, asthma, and muscle diseases. A lack of oxygen supply to the brain is a type of medical emergency that needs an immediate treatment protocol. The brain must immediately receive the oxygen supply so that it functions properly and is prevented against complications and brain death. Treatment of brain anoxia varies from person to person, but in most cases, basic life support systems are usually needed. A ventilator is usually required for breathing in such patients. Other treatment modalities include blood transfusions, medications, fluids to restore heart rate, and blood pressure. The human brain comprises of 2% of the entire body weight, and it is the vital organ which consumes most of the oxygen throughout the body. Lack of oxygen supply to the brain for 40 to 180 seconds can result in loss of consciousness. After 1 minute, the brain cells start dying, and after 3 minutes, the neurons undergo extensive damage, after which the brain suffers from long-term damage. After 5 minutes of lack of oxygen supply, the brain becomes dead. After 15 minutes of lack of oxygen supply, the survival of the person becomes impossible. An inadequate supply of oxygen can cause stroke, swelling, and leads to the crushing of the brain from the outside. A lack of oxygen supply can cause cerebral hemorrhaging, leading to internal bleeding in the brain and ultimately death.
On November 5, 2005, 2 workers died at the Valero Energy Corporation refinery in Delaware City, Delaware. They had entered a reactor vessel, a confined space that was filled with nitrogen, an odorless, invisible gas. The accident occurred during a maintenance operation at the 5,000-acre facility, which processes 180,000 barrels of crude oil per day. The complex is one of Valero's 18 U.S. refineries and has 570 employees. In refineries and chemical plants, dangerous, low-oxygen environments are created when inert gases like nitrogen are used to remove oxygen from pipes and equipment.
And when the oxygen-deprived atmosphere begins to enter the lungs, the oxygen in the blood that's going to the brain starts to fall. That affects the brain's judgment, it affects coordination, it affects the ability to exert strength. They fall down, fall unconscious.
Valero's hydrocracker reactor number R1 was shut down for maintenance. A large pipe elbow had been removed, creating an opening surrounded by large steel bolts in the middle of the platform. Workers had wrapped red tape around the bolts and covered the opening with plywood and plastic. Nitrogen flowed into the reactor and exited from the covered opening. Nitrogen is invisible, but it is colored light green here for illustration. Workers had attached a sign reading, "Danger, confined space, do not enter without permit." However, there were no specific warnings posted about the nitrogen hazard. A crew of Matrix contract workers had received a Valero-issued permit to reinstall the pipe elbow. The safe work permit did not warn the crew that the reactor was filled with nitrogen. In fact, the permit stated, quote, "Nitrogen purge NA, not applicable." 2 contract workers removed the plywood cover and cleaned the ledge around the opening. At about that time, a 3rd worker noticed a roll of duct tape lying 5 feet down inside the reactor. This presented the crew with a problem. The tape would cause the reactor to fail Valero's cleanliness inspection, and they would not be allowed to reinstall the elbow until it was removed. However, entering the reactor to remove the tape would require obtaining a specially trained and equipped crew and a confined space entry permit from Valero. That process would take many hours and delay the installation of the elbow, which was to be completed before the end of the night shift, now half over. In addition, the crane needed for lifting the 5-ton elbow into place had just become available for a short period. To avoid the long delay, one worker stood near the opening with a long, flexible wire and made several attempts to hook the tape. But he was unsuccessful. What seemed like an easy task just wasn't working. Most likely, the worker then got closer by sitting on the ledge of the opening with his legs dangling inside. But he still could not remove the tape. Based on the evidence, the CSB developed two possible scenarios for what happened next. In the first scenario, the worker lowered himself into the reactor to quickly grab the tape, relying on his foreman nearby to insert a ladder so he could climb back out. But after lowering himself into the reactor, he inhaled the nearly pure nitrogen inside. Deprived of oxygen, he quickly collapsed. In the second scenario, the worker on the ledge leaned over the opening, trying to get closer to the tape. At that point, he either accidentally slipped into the reactor, or he breathed in the oxygen-deficient atmosphere just above the opening, lost consciousness, and slid in. What happened next added to the tragedy. An eyewitness saw the foreman and the contract administrator peering into the reactor. The stricken worker was lying unconscious inside. The foreman quickly inserted the ladder into the reactor and climbed down to help his fellow worker. But without a breathing apparatus, he too collapsed from the lack of oxygen. The contract administrator declared an emergency on his radio. Valero operators then sounded the unit alarm. When company emergency responders arrived a short time later, they saw both victims lying motionless inside the reactor. A handheld meter inserted through the opening showed less than 1% oxygen, a lethal atmosphere. Wearing supplied air breathing equipment, the responders entered the reactor. A rescue hoist was used to remove the workers. It was now almost 10 minutes since the first worker had collapsed. Attempts to revive the men were unsuccessful, and both were later pronounced dead at the hospital.
This video shows the inside of the Valero reactor where the accident occurred. The roll of tape still visible just 5 feet below the opening. It's a situation where a worker might be tempted to believe he could quickly get in and out to accomplish what appeared to be a simple task. But safety experts warn that would be fatal. Nitrogen gas hazards are not limited to the inside of confined spaces. The CSB concluded that industry safety guidelines, Valero procedures, and OSHA standards do not adequately warn of low oxygen hazards outside of confined spaces near openings.
A person who's leaning over, for example, with their face close to an opening in a vessel with nitrogen under pressure is not going to be breathing.
Warning signs and barricades are additional protection for workers tempted to enter low oxygen environments. The CSB found that there was a confined space warning sign posted at the opening of the Valero reactor. But it was only after the accident that the company put up a barricade around the work area with a sign reading, "Danger. Nitrogen inert gas purge in progress. Oxygen deficient atmosphere. Do not pass this point without authorization." When a worker does enter an oxygen deficient confined space and is overcome, it can set the stage for further tragedy, as other co-workers attempt rescue without proper breathing and rescue equipment. This can lead to multiple deaths.
It's particularly sad because they run into the situation very often without getting self-contained breathing apparatus, without getting an air supply, and fall victims themselves. It's not a question.
The recommendations emphasize the need for training in work around confined spaces and on the dangers of oxygen deprivation.
Carbon monoxide is a toxic, asphyxiating gas. Colourless and odourless, it can quickly kill. It builds up when the fumes produced by fuel-burning cooking and heating systems, gas, petrol, oil, kerosene, wood or coal, are not extracted properly. A blocked pipe, obstructed air vents, worn-out, misused or poorly maintained appliances could all prevent normal gas evacuation. Leaving a car engine or an electric generator running in an enclosed space also causes a dangerous build-up of fumes. Carbon monoxide has nearly the same density as air and can spread quickly. Once inhaled in large doses, it's absorbed through the lungs and enters into the bloodstream, mixing with hemoglobin instead of oxygen. 0.1% of carbon monoxide in the air kills in 1 hour, 1% in 15 minutes, and 10% immediately. Acute carbon monoxide poisoning can lead to dizziness, loss of consciousness, muscular problems, or even slipping into a coma and death. In extreme cases, patients are hospitalized and placed in a hyperbaric chamber to undergo oxygen therapy. Chronic poisoning, which triggers symptoms like headaches, nausea, and confusion, can be hard to detect and can also lead to long-term heart and respiratory problems.
Stop! Check the oxygen first. Low oxygen may not be visible. You can collapse before you realize the danger. Test oxygen before entering. Check for other atmospheric hazards too. Continue monitoring during the work as required. The atmosphere has been verified. The entry is now properly controlled. Remember, oxygen deficiency can kill silently.
This is why you should never enter a random cave hole without checking first. A cave in Costa Rica is one of nature's death traps. When a man waved a lit torch in the upper part of the cave, nothing unusual happened. But as soon as the torch was moved closer to the ground, it instantly went out. This occurs primarily because the concentration of carbon dioxide is too high at the bottom of the cave. So, if you encounter such a cave, it's crucial not to venture in recklessly, as it could be extremely dangerous.